you look at me when I'm talking to you. How dare you disrespect me in public?
The crack of Terrell's palm against Chantel's face silenced the entire cafe. Not the polite kind of quiet, the suffocating kind, where even the espresso machine seemed to hold its breath. Chantel's head snapped sideways, her white headband jarring loose, dark coils spilling across her shoulders. The taste of copper bloomed on her tongue. Across the room, behind a newspaper he'd been pretending to read for the past 20 minutes, a man in an immaculate charcoal suit lowered the pages with the careful precision of someone who'd just made an irreversible decision. Ray Young's face remained perfectly calm, but his left hand, the one with the family ring, the one that had signed orders ending careers and occasionally lives, had gone completely still on the table. Tyrell didn't know it yet, but he'd crossed a line that didn't exist on any map. And the kind of line you only discover when it's already too late to step back. 3 months. Ray had been coming to Cafe Meridian every Saturday for 3 months, always ordering the same black coffee, always sitting in the corner booth with a clear view of the entire room. He told himself it was strategic, good vantage point, neutral territory for quiet meetings. But Min Jun, his second in command, knew better. His boss came here to watch her. Chantel Freeman moved through the cafe like water finding its path. Efficient, graceful, almost invisible to everyone except those paying attention. At 26, she carried herself with a dignity that her uniform couldn't diminish. Ray had noticed her the first time she'd defended an elderly customer from an impatient businessman, on her voice steady and unapologetic despite the $50 bills in the man's wallet. Now, as Terrell's laughter echoed through the cafe and Chantel refused to lower her eyes, Ray folded his newspaper with movements so controlled they bordered on ceremonial. He'd built his reputation on knowing exactly when to act and when to wait. This was not a time to wait. Chantel's alarm screamed at 5 a.m., the sound drilling into her skull like a judgment. She slapped it silent and lay there for exactly 30 seconds, her only luxury, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of nowhere she'd ever go. The Bronx apartment she shared with 2 other women smelled like someone else's leftover takeout, and the particular sadness of dreams deferred. Through the thin walls, she could hear Keisha's baby crying and the muffled argument that had become the soundtrack of this building. Chantel swung her legs out of bed, her body protesting with aches she'd learned to ignore at 23 and had become intimate with by 26. 3 jobs. 3 different versions of herself. 3 ways to survive. The shower was cold. The landlord had promised to fix the water heater 2 months ago, which meant he'd never fix it. So Chantel moved fast, her mind already cataloging the day ahead. By 5:47, she was dressed in the first uniform. Black pants, white shirt, sensible shoes that cost more than she wanted to admit, because cheap shoes meant ruined feet, and ruined feet meant she couldn't work. The subway at 6:15 was packed with other early risers, all of them wearing the same expression of exhausted determination. Chantel pulled out her phone, not to scroll social media like the college kids around her, but to review the course catalog she'd downloaded from NYU, Business Administration. The degree she'd started 4 years ago before her mother got sick, and the medical bills started arriving like a plague. She'd made it through sophomore year before the math became impossible, tuition or treatment. There was never really a choice. Her first job was in a penthouse on the Upper East Side, cleaning for the Vandermeer family. Mrs. Vandermeer was the kind of woman who wore yoga pants that cost more than Chantel made in a week, and complained about the exhaustion of choosing between the Hamptons and Aspen for the holidays. Chantel moved through their 17 rooms like a ghost, scrubbing toilets and dusting bookshelves filled with books no one read, making beds that would be unmade in hours. The invisibility was the worst part, not the work. Chantel had never been afraid of work, but the way they looked through her, around her, never quite at her, like she was part of the furniture, something functional and forgettable. "Oh, you're still here?" Mrs. Vandermeer said, when she emerged from the master bedroom at 11 a.m., surprised to find Chantel cleaning the hallway bathroom. as if Chantel might have evaporated once her usefulness was done. "Just finishing up, ma'am." Chantel kept her voice neutral, professional, empty of the 1,000 responses she'd never say aloud. By noon, she was on the subway again, heading to her second job at Crystal Clean Dry Cleaners in Midtown. Mr. Park owned it. I'm a Korean immigrant who'd been in New York for 30 years and still had an accent thick enough to make customers impatient. But he paid on time, never shorted hours, and didn't ask questions when Chantel needed to shift her schedule. "Chantel, he called when she walked in, using the Korean suffix of casual affection. "Big order today. Wedding party. 20 suits, 15 dresses." She spent the next 4 hours steaming, pressing, checking for stains that needed special treatment. Her phone buzzed at 2:37, a text from her younger sister Naomi. "Got an A on my econ midterm. Professor said I have real talent for analysis. Love you, sis." Chantel stared at the message, feeling something crack and seal simultaneously in her chest. Naomi was a junior at Spelman, thriving in the college experience Chantel had sacrificed to make possible. And their mother's illness had taken most of the college fund, but Chantel sent money every month. Money that should have been rebuilding her own education fund, but instead kept Naomi in textbooks and meal plans. Pride and grief were twin rivers, and Chantel had learned to swim in both. "So proud of you. You're going to change the world. Call me Sunday?" She sent the text, then returned to pressing a tuxedo jacket that probably cost more than a semester's tuition. At 4:45, she clocked out and made her way to Lower Manhattan to Cafe Meridian. This was her favorite shift, not because it paid more, it didn't, but because here, people saw her. The regulars knew her name. Mrs. Glenn always asked about her week. The college students studying for exams left generous tips and sincere thank yous. And there was something else about this place. Something that felt less like survival and more like living. Chantel changed in the small employee bathroom, trading her dry cleaning clothes for the cafe's simple black dress and white apron. She tied her hair back, checked her reflection. Exhaustion had carved subtle lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, and stepped into the warm chaos of the early evening rush. "Chantel." Rosa, the manager, greeted her with genuine warmth. "Thank God. Kellyanne called in sick and we've got a party of 12 coming at 6. Think you can handle the back section?" "Always do." The rhythm of the work was familiar, almost meditative. Take orders, deliver food, refill drinks, clear tables, smile even when your feet screamed and your back ached. But here, the smile wasn't just armor. Here, people smiled back. Yet the corner booth by the window had been occupied since before Chantel arrived. The man sitting there was Korean, late 30s, dressed in a suit that whispered money rather than shouted it. He came every Saturday, always alone, always ordered black coffee and nothing else, always left a $20 bill on a $6 check. Chantel had learned not to make assumptions about people. The wealthiest sometimes tipped worst, while construction workers might leave half their paycheck. But something about this man intrigued her. He read his newspaper with intense focus, but she'd caught him watching the cafe with the kind of attention that suggested he was looking for something specific, or someone. She'd wondered, in the quiet moments between orders, if he was lonely. If that's why he came here, to this cafe, waiting to sit among the noise and warmth of other people's lives. "Table 7 needs water," Rosa called, pulling Chantel back to the present. The evening rush built like a wave. Chantel moved through it with practiced efficiency, her body remembering the patterns even as her mind drifted to the course catalog on her phone, to the dream that felt further away with each passing year. Then, at 7:23 p.m., the door opened, and Terrell walked in. What does Chantel see in Terrell that makes her immediately tense? Why is the suited businessman's newspaper suddenly motionless? Ray Young had built an empire on patterns. He understood that power wasn't about loud displays or theatrical gestures. It was about knowing which threads to pull and when. For 15 years, he'd operated in the shadows of New York's underworld, managing legitimate businesses that funded less legitimate operations, all while maintaining the facade of a successful but unremarkable import-export entrepreneur. His Saturday ritual at Café Meridian had started as coincidence. A meeting location that fell through, an empty afternoon, a quiet place to read the financial section without interruption. Then he'd noticed her. It was a small moment, really. An elderly Korean woman had dropped her purse, contents scattering across the floor. Most of the staff were slammed with the lunch rush, moving too fast to stop. But Chantel had knelt immediately, gathering reading glasses and medication bottles with careful hands, speaking to the woman in broken but earnest Korean that made the elderly customer's face light up with surprised delight. Ray had watched Chantel help the woman to her seat, bring her tea without being asked, check on her twice more before she left. The woman had tried to tip, but Chantel had refused with a smile that suggested she understood the difference between generosity and necessity. That smile had stayed with Ray for days. He'd started coming back, telling himself it was about the coffee, the atmosphere, the strategic location. But Min-jun had caught him watching Chantel navigate a difficult customer with diplomatic grace, and had raised an eyebrow that said everything his second-in-command was too smart to voice aloud. "Her name is Chantel Freeman," Min-jun had reported after Ray made the mistake of asking about cafe staffing. 26, works 3 jobs, dropped out of NYU 2 years ago, family medical situation, sends money to a younger sister in college, clean record, no debt beyond student loans. Lives in the Bronx with 2 roommates. Ray had memorized every detail while pretending the information was purely procedural. The truth he wouldn't admit, even to himself, was that Chantel reminded him of Ji-yeon. His younger sister had possessed that same resilient dignity, that ability to smile genuinely despite exhaustion, that refusal to let hardship poison her kindness. Ji-yeon had been studying to become a social worker when a rival gang's drive-by shooting had taken her life at 23, caught in crossfire meant for someone else entirely. Ray had built his organization's reputation on the ashes of his grief. The gangs responsible had learned that some debts could only be paid in blood. But revenge hadn't filled the hole Ji-yeon left. Nothing had. Until 3 months ago, when he'd walked into this cafe and seen someone else fighting to stay soft in a world that rewarded hardness. He'd instructed Min-jun to ensure Chantel's walk home from her evening shift was monitored. Just protection, he told himself. Standard protocol for civilians who'd caught his attention. But he'd also had her student loan servicer contacted through intermediary channels, exploring options for anonymous payment that she'd never trace back to him. Min-jun had been too loyal to question these decisions aloud, but Ray saw the concern in his second's eyes. Getting emotionally involved was dangerous in their world. Caring made you vulnerable. Vulnerability got people killed. Today, though, Ray had made a different decision. He would speak to her after her shift. Nothing elaborate. Just an introduction, maybe an invitation for coffee somewhere neutral. He'd rehearsed the approach like a tactical operation, considering angles and contingencies. He'd been so focused on his planned conversation that he almost missed the moment when everything changed. The door opened with its familiar chime. 3 men entered, moving with the swagger of people who'd never faced real consequences. Ray cataloged them automatically. Mid-20s, gang affiliations based on tattoos visible beneath rolled sleeves, the slight bulge at the leader's waistband suggesting a poorly concealed weapon. The leader, Terrell, based on the name one of his companions called out, was already drunk despite the early evening hour. His eyes scanned the cafe with predatory assessment, lingering too long on the young waitress behind the counter. Ray's hand tightened on his newspaper, but he remained still. This wasn't his business. He was here for Chantel, and getting involved in random cafe drama would only complicate things. Then Terrell approached the counter where a teenager named Kellyanne was working, and Ray watched Chantel's posture shift. She'd been refilling water glasses at a nearby table, but her attention had locked onto the interaction with the focus of someone who recognized danger. Ray knew that awareness. He'd spent 15 years cultivating it. Seeing it in Chantel, This woman who cleaned penthouses and pressed shirts and served coffee made something tighten in his chest. She was going to intervene. He could see it in the set of her shoulders, the way her hands had stilled on the water pitcher. Every instinct Ray possessed screamed that he should stand up right now, handle this before it escalated, remove the threat before Chantel put herself in its path. But he'd learned long ago that acting too quickly could reveal more than staying still. So he watched, and he waited, and he prepared for the moment when waiting would no longer be an option. That moment came when Terrell's hand closed around Kellyanne's wrist, and Chantel set down her water pitcher with the quiet finality of someone who'd made an irrevocable choice. Ray's newspaper crinkled slightly in his grip. Across the cafe, Chantel was walking toward a confrontation that could end very badly for her. And for the first time in 15 years, Ray Young felt something he'd trained himself never to feel in operational situations. Fear. Not for himself, but for someone else. Before we continue with what happened 5 hours later, hit that subscribe button. Because what comes next will change everything for both of them, and you don't want to miss a single moment of this story. Chantel had learned to recognize trouble the way some people recognized weather patterns. Growing up in a neighborhood where violence was ambient noise, she'd developed instincts that kept her safe. When to cross the street, when to avoid eye contact, when to make herself invisible. Right now, every instinct screamed at her to stay invisible. Terrell had Kellyanne backed against the counter, his hand still gripping her wrist despite her attempts to pull away. The young waitress was 19, new to the city, working her way through community college. She'd confided in Chantel last week about how scary New York felt sometimes, how different from the small town in Pennsylvania where she'd grown up. "Please let go," Kellyanne was saying, her voice thin with fear. "I'm just trying to work." Terrell laughed, a sound that carried too far in the suddenly quiet cafe. "Just trying to work," he mimicked in a cruel falsetto. "Baby, you could work for me. Make way more than serving coffee to these nobodies." His companions laughed on cue, flanking him like backup singers in a performance no one wanted to watch. The cafe's other customers had gone silent. That particular kind of silence where everyone pretends very hard not to see what's happening right in front of them. Chantel felt the weight of that silence like a physical thing. She understood it. Getting involved was dangerous, could cost you more than you were willing to pay. But she also understood what it felt like to need help and watch people look away. She set down the water pitcher and walked toward the counter. "Leave her alone." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "She's just doing her job." Terrell turned, his eyes scanning Chantel with the kind of assessment that made her skin crawl. He released Kellyanne's wrist but didn't step back, instead redirecting his attention to this new challenge. "And who the fuck are you?" He looked her up and down, taking in her uniform, her practical shoes, the headband holding back her hair. "Oh, I see. Another nobody playing hero." Chantel kept her voice level. "I'm asking you politely to leave. You're making customers uncomfortable." "Customers?" Terrell glanced around theatrically. "I don't see anybody complaining. Do you see anybody complaining?" He directed this to his companions, who shook their heads and grinned. From the corner of her eye, Chantel could see other patrons studying their plates, their phones, anywhere but the confrontation unfolding in their midst. Only one person seemed to be paying attention. The Korean businessman in the corner booth had lowered his newspaper and was watching with an intensity that felt almost physical. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Chantel tried again. Her heart was hammering, but she'd learned years ago that showing fear was like showing blood to sharks. Terrell stepped closer, invading her space deliberately. She could smell alcohol and cologne, expensive sneakers that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "You're gonna ask me? You?" He laughed, and there was genuine amusement mixed with something uglier. "You're just some maid, some nobody in an apron. What makes you think you can tell me what to do?" The word maid landed like a slap. Chantel felt heat rise in her face, not from shame but from rage, at how easily he'd tried to reduce her worth to her occupation. I'm asking you because it's the right thing to do, she said quietly. And because that girl you were just harassing is scared and you know it. Something shifted in Tyrell's expression. The amusement curdled into something meaner. Oh, so you're one of those. Always gotta be the hero. Always gotta prove something. He moved even closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Let me tell you something about heroes, sweetheart. They get hurt. Real bad. Real often. Across the cafe, Chantel saw the businessman's hands tighten on his newspaper hard enough to crumple the pages. But he didn't move. No one moved. The entire cafe had become a tableau of cowardice and frozen action. You need to leave, Chantel repeated. Her voice didn't shake, even though her hands wanted to. Now. Tyrell's face twisted. Did this bitch just tell me what to do? He looked back at his companions, who were already tensing, reading their leader's mood shift from cruel amusement to actual anger. You know what I think? I think somebody needs to teach you about respect. About knowing your place. The slap came fast enough that Chantel didn't have time to turn away. The crack of his palm against her face seemed to echo off every surface, amplified by the shocked silence that followed. Her head snapped sideways, pain blooming sharp and hot across her cheek. Her headband came loose, hair spilling across her shoulders. She tasted blood where her teeth had caught the inside of her lip. For a moment, the world reduced to that copper taste and the ringing in her ears. Then fury rose, hot and clarifying. Chantel straightened slowly, forcing herself not to touch her face, not to give him the satisfaction of seeing her react to the pain. She looked directly at Tyrell, refusing to lower her gaze, refusing to cower. That's all you've got? Her voice came out rough but steady. A grown man hitting a woman half his size in front of witnesses? Real impressive. Tyrell's face darkened with rage, his hand rising again. And then the businessman stood up. The movement was precise, almost ceremonial. He folded his newspaper with meticulous care, set it on the table, and smoothed his suit jacket with hands that didn't shake. When he spoke, his voice cut through the cafe's terrified silence like a blade through silk. Everyone out, now. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. There was something in those 3 words that bypassed rational thought and went straight to primal survival instinct. The authority in his tone suggested someone who expected to be obeyed and had never learned what happened when people didn't comply. Ray had witnessed violence in 17 countries across 4 continents. He'd ordered operations that ended careers, destroyed reputations, and occasionally, when absolutely necessary, ended lives. He understood brutality in all its forms, from the calculated and clinical to the explosive and chaotic. But watching Tyrell strike Chantel had triggered something in Ray that bypassed 15 years of carefully cultivated control. For a moment, standing in that cafe with his newspaper folded on the table, he wasn't the measured strategist who'd built an empire on patience and precision. He was the 19-year-old who'd found his sister dying in the street, her blood pooling on concrete while sirens wailed in the distance. I set everyone out. His voice hadn't risen, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Except you 3. He gestured to Tyrell and his companions with the casual certainty of someone who knew his instructions would be followed. The cafe emptied like water through a broken dam. Customers grabbed coats and bags, abandoning half-finished meals and full coffee cups in their haste to reach the door. The elderly couple in the corner booth moved faster than Ray would have thought possible. A mother grabbed her toddler and practically ran. Kellyanne hesitated by the counter, looking between Ray and Chantel with terrified indecision. You too, Ray said gently. Go home. You're safe now. The young waitress fled. Chantel remained frozen near the counter, one hand finally rising to touch her split lip, her eyes locked on Ray with a mixture of shock and confusion. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth, stark against her dark skin. Her breathing was controlled but shallow, the kind of careful breathing people use when they're trying not to fall apart. Ray met her gaze across the distance between them, and for a moment the cafe contained only the two of them. He saw pride in her eyes, refusing to be diminished by what had just happened. He saw confusion about who he was and what he was doing. And underneath both, he saw the first crack in her armor. Fear. Not of Tyrell, but of what came next. "You too," he said softly. "Go home. This is handled." Chantel's jaw tightened. I know you don't need me." Ray kept his voice gentle despite the rage burning in his chest. "But let me do this anyway." Something in his tone must have reached her, because after a long moment Chantel nodded. She grabbed her bag from behind the counter, moving stiffly like someone whose adrenaline was beginning to crash. She looked at Ray one more time, questions written clearly in her expression, then walked to the door. Outside, Min-jun would be waiting. Ray had texted his second-in-command the moment Tyrell had raised his hand, a simple code that meant extraction protocol. Min-jun would ensure Chantel got home safely. He'd also ensure she understood this was care, not control. The door chimed as Chantel left. Through the window, Ray watched her stop on the sidewalk as Min-jun approached with careful, non-threatening body language. He saw her resistance, then reluctant acceptance as Min-jun gestured to the black sedan parked at the curb. Good. She was safe. Now Ray could focus on the problem at hand. He walked to the door, locked it with smooth precision, and flipped the sign to closed. The blinds came down next, cutting off the view from the street. The cafe transformed from public space to private theater, and the three men who'd been so confident minutes ago now looked decidedly less certain. "Who the fuck do you think you are?" Tyrell blustered, but Ray heard the uncertainty beneath the aggression. "You know who my brother is? You know what he'll do to you?" Ray removed his suit jacket, folding it carefully over the back of a chair. His movements were unhurried, methodical. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms marked with tattoos that most people never saw. Korean script intertwined with symbols that told stories he never shared. "I know exactly who your brother is." Ray's voice remained conversational. "Stu Coulson. Runs a crew out of Red Hook. Small-time dealer trying to expand territory. Makes a lot of noise about respect, but lacks the infrastructure to back it up. Recently lost a shipment to NYPD, currently scrambling to cover debts to suppliers who don't accept excuses." Tyrell's face went pale. "How do you—" "The better question," Ray continued, approaching with measured steps, "is whether you understand who I am." One of Tyrell's companions, the smarter one apparently, was already backing toward the door. Ray's eyes flicked to him, and the man froze like a rabbit spotting a wolf. "You put your hands on her," Ray said quietly. "You struck a woman who was defending someone weaker. You did it publicly, arrogantly, because you've never faced real consequences for your actions." "Listen, man." Tyrell raised his hands, swagger evaporating. "It's not that serious. She was just some—" Ray moved faster than anyone in the cafe could track. One moment he was 3 feet away, the next his hand was around Tyrell's throat, slamming him back against the wall hard enough to rattle picture frames. Tyrell's companions started forward, then stopped as Ray's eyes cut to them with a look that promised they did not want to test him. "Finish that sentence," Ray said softly, his face inches from Tyrell's. "Tell me what you were about to call her. What I want to hear you say it." Tyrell couldn't speak with Ray's hand constricting his airway. His eyes bulged, hands scrabbling uselessly at Ray's wrist. "Here's what's going to happen," Ray continued, his voice never rising above conversational volume. "You're going to learn something about respect, about consequences, about what happens when you touch something that belongs under my protection." He released Tyrell's throat just enough for the man to drag in a desperate breath. "And then," Ray said, "you're going to leave this city and never come back. Because if I ever see you again, if I ever hear your name associated with any woman in any cafe or bar or street in this city, I will find you. And I will teach you lessons that your brother's reputation cannot protect you from." What happened next took exactly 7 minutes. Ray was precise. methodical, and utterly controlled. He ensured Terrell would remember this night every time he looked in a mirror, but he also ensured Terrell would survive to remember it. Pain was temporary. Fear, when applied correctly, lasted forever. When it was over, Terrell and his companions stumbled out the back exit, supporting each other, broken but breathing. They wouldn't go to the police. Men like them never did. They'd go to Stu, and Stu would come looking for answers. Ray had anticipated this. Planned for it even. Sometimes the best way to flush out a problem was to give it a reason to reveal itself. He cleaned the cafe with practiced efficiency, erasing evidence, restoring order. By the time he unlocked the front door 20 minutes later, everything looked exactly as it had before Terrell arrived, except for the slightly repositioned furniture and the faint smell of cleaning solution. Ray pulled out his phone and sent a text to Min Jun. Status? The response came immediately. Safe at home, confused but unharmed. She asked about you. Tell her nothing. Maintain distance unless she's in danger. Boss? Are you sure this is wise? Ray stared at the message for a long moment before responding. No, but do it anyway. He left cash on the counter to cover damages and walked out into the New York night. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the smell of street vendors and exhaust. Somewhere in this city, Chantel Freeman was probably trying to process what had happened, researching his name, finding nothing substantial, wondering who the quiet businessman really was. And, somewhere else, Stu Coulson was about to receive news that would set wheels in motion Ray had already prepared for. The game was entering its next phase. Ray had revealed himself as a player, which meant he could no longer simply watch and protect from the shadows. He'd made Chantel visible to people who dealt in leverage and revenge, but he'd also sent a message to anyone watching. She was protected now. Openly. Absolutely. As Ray walked to where his car waited 3 blocks away, he pulled out his phone and made a call that would activate networks across the city. By morning, everyone who needed to know would understand that Chantel Freeman was under the protection of Ray Young. And in Ray's world, that protection was as absolute as a declaration of war. Chantel sat on her bed in the small Bronx apartment. She's still wearing her cafe uniform, her roommate's concerned questions washing over her without fully registering. The left side of her face throbbed where Terrell had struck her, swelling that she'd iced for 20 minutes before giving up. The physical pain was manageable. The rest of it, the humiliation, the fear, the confusion, was harder to process. Girl, you need to report this, Keisha was saying from the doorway, her baby balanced on one hip. That's assault, clear as day. Chantel touched her split lip gingerly. Report it to who? Police? She laughed without humor. You know how that goes for people like us. I tell them some rich guy hit me. They ask what I did to provoke him. Then report it to your manager. Get him banned from the cafe. Rosa already texted. She's closing tomorrow to deal with whatever happened after I left. Chantel's phone screen showed 3 messages from her manager, each more frantically apologetic than the last. She thinks I'm traumatized, wants me to take the week off. What Rosa didn't know, what Chantel was still trying to understand herself, was that the most traumatic part of the evening hadn't been the slap. It had been the man in the charcoal suit who'd cleared the cafe with 3 words, whose calm voice had carried more authority than any shouting could achieve. The man whose second-in-command had driven her home in a car that cost more than she'd make in 5 years. Tell me about the driver again, Keisha prompted, reading Chantel's expression. The Asian guy who brought you home? Min Jun, Chantel said, remembering the careful way he'd introduced himself. He said his employer wanted to ensure I got home safely, wouldn't say anything else. Just polite, professional. Like he did this sort of thing all the time. And the employer? The suit guy? Chantel pulled out her phone and opened the search she'd been conducting for the past hour. Ray Young, that's all I know. That's what Min Jun called him. But there's barely anything online. A few business registrations, import-export, commercial real estate. Vague enough to be anything or nothing. Maybe he's just a good Samaritan, Keisha offered, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. Good Samaritans don't have drivers. They don't clear rooms with that kind of voice. Chantel closed the search, frustrated. And they definitely don't make guys like Terrell look terrified. Her phone buzzed. Turn another text from Naomi. Call me when you can. Miss you. Chantel's chest tightened. Her sister didn't know what had happened tonight, didn't know that Chantel had been publicly humiliated and struck. Naomi's life was supposed to be different. College parties and study groups, and a future that didn't involve getting slapped for defending coworkers. Don't tell Naomi, Chantel said to Keisha. Please. She'll worry, and she's got midterms. Keisha nodded, understanding the weight of being the older sister who carried burdens alone. After Keisha left, Chantel lay on her bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Terrell's hand coming toward her face. Then she saw Ray Young standing up, folding his newspaper with movements that suggested violence rendered precise. Who was he? And why did she feel safer knowing he'd witnessed what happened than she would have felt if he hadn't been there at all? Across the city, in an office that officially didn't exist, Ray Young sat at a conference table surrounded by people who didn't appear on any organizational chart. Min-jun stood to his right, tablet in hand, running through security footage from the cafe and surrounding streets. 3 other lieutenants occupied chairs around the table. Ji-hoon, who handled financial operations, Yuki, who managed information networks, and David, who specialized in problems that required more permanent solutions. Tyrell Coulson, 27, Min-jun reported, pulling up a file on the wall screen. Multiple priors, assault, possession with intent, extortion, connected to his brother Stu's operation but not a key player. More liability than asset. Stu Coulson? Ray prompted. 31, runs a mid-level distribution network out of Red Hook. Aspirations exceed capabilities. He's trying to expand territory but lacks the discipline and infrastructure. Currently owes approximately $200,000 to Colombian suppliers after the NYPD seized a shipment last month. Ray studied the photographs on screen. Stu had the same aggressive features as his younger brother, but with added hardness that came from actual violence rather than theatrical posturing. Stu's going to come after you, Ji-hoon said bluntly. You hospitalized his brother. That demands response in his world. I'm counting on it, Ray replied calmly. The room went silent. Min-jun's eyes narrowed. He recognized that tone. Their boss was several moves ahead, and whatever came next had already been planned. Boss, Min-jun said carefully, why are we risking organizational exposure over a cafe worker? It was the question Ray had been expecting, the question he didn't have a good answer for, or at least not one that would satisfy his lieutenant's strategic concerns. Because respect isn't negotiable, Ray said evenly. In any context. That man publicly assaulted someone under my protection in a space I frequent. Failing to respond would signal weakness. But she wasn't under your protection, Yuki pointed out. Not officially. Not until you made her so by intervening. Ray's jaw tightened. She is now. Min-jun and Ji-hoon exchanged glances. David, who'd worked with Ray the longest, leaned back in his chair with the faint smile of someone who'd just confirmed a suspicion. What do we know about Chantel Freeman? Ray asked, changing the subject. Min-jun pulled up a new file, more detailed than the preliminary research he'd conducted weeks ago. 26, born and raised in Brooklyn, honor student through high school, full scholarship to NYU, business administration. Maintained a 3.8 GPA until she withdrew midway through sophomore year. Why did she withdraw? Ray asked, though he already knew. Mother was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. Chantel came home to help with care. Medical bills consumed the family's savings. Mother passed 18 months ago. Chantel never returned to school. Ray absorbed this in silence. It matched what he'd learned through other channels, but hearing it stated so clinically made the tragedy feel sharper. She has a younger sister, Naomi Freeman, being currently junior at Spelman College in Atlanta, Min-jun continued. Chantel sends her approximately $800 monthly, nearly 40% of her total income from 3 jobs. What jobs? Ji-hoon asked. Morning shift cleaning for a housekeeping service, afternoon shift at Crystal Clean Dry Cleaners, evening shift at Cafe Meridian. Total approximately 60 hours weekly. Yuki whistled low. That's unsustainable. Yet she sustained it for 2 years, David observed. That's not survival. That's dedication. Ray thought about Chantel arranging water pitchers, checking on elderly customers, defending a teenage waitress despite knowing it could cost her. Dedication didn't begin to cover it. She's researching me, Min-jun added. Search history shows multiple attempts to find information about Ray Young, New York, and related terms. She found our legitimate business fronts, but nothing substantial. Good. Ray stood, walking to the window that overlooked Manhattan's glittering expanse. Keep it that way. No contact unless she's in immediate danger. Boss, Min-jun said quietly, Stu Coulson is already making calls. Our sources say he's gathering information about the Korean businessman who put his brother in the hospital. He's going to connect you to the cafe, and when he does, he'll look for leverage, Ray finished. He'll identify the woman I protected. He'll see her as a weakness. Exactly. Which is why maintaining distance won't matter. Ray turned to face his team. Stu will move against her whether I stay away or not. I made her visible. That means I'm responsible for what happens next. The room fell silent again as the implications settled. You're using her as bait, David said slowly. You want Stu to come after her. I'm preparing for the inevitable, Ray corrected. Stu is already compromised. Debt to the Colombians, NYPD pressure, territory disputes with the Russians. He's desperate, which makes him reckless. He'll see Chantel as an easy target, a way to hurt me without direct confrontation. And when he moves? Ji-hoon asked. Ray's expression went cold. We'll be ready. Full surveillance on Chantel's apartment, place of work, common routes. I want eyes on her every moment. The second Stu makes contact, I want to know. Min-jun made notes on his tablet, then paused. What about Chantel? Does she get a say in being protected? It was a fair question. Ray had built his organization on codes that his competitors had abandoned. Consent mattered, even in protection. Especially in protection. She doesn't know she needs protecting yet, Ray said quietly. But she will. Soon. In Red Hook, Stu Coulson's phone rang at 11:34 p.m. The hospital had finally released Terrell, who could barely speak through his broken jaw, but had managed to communicate the essential details. Korean businessman, Cafe Meridian, humiliation that demanded blood. Stu listened to his brother's garbled account with growing rage. Not because he cared about Tyrell. His little brother was an idiot who'd probably deserved whatever beating he'd received, but because someone had publicly disrespected Coulson blood. In Stu's world, that couldn't stand. Find out everything about this Ray Young, he told his second, a scarred veteran of Brooklyn's gang wars named Campbell. I want to know what he cares about, who he protects, where he's vulnerable. Already on it, Campbell replied, sliding a tablet across the table. Pulled surveillance from businesses near the cafe. Got clear shots of Young leaving, plus footage of some Korean guy driving a black Mercedes picking up a woman in a cafe uniform. Stu studied the images. The woman was young, black, pretty in an understated way. She looked tired, but defiant, even sitting in the back of a luxury car that obviously didn't belong to her. Who is she? Running her face now. Should have ID within the hour. Stu smiled without humor. Men like Ray Young, wealthy, powerful, protected by layers of legitimate business, they always had weak points. Usually those weak points were women they cared about more than they should. When you ID her, Stu said, I want everything. Where she lives, where she works, who she talks to. And then we're going to send Mr. Young a message about respect, about what happens when you put your hands on my family. Campbell nodded and disappeared to make calls. Stu poured himself whiskey and stared at the frozen image of the woman on the tablet screen. She had no idea she'd just become the most important piece on a chessboard she didn't know existed. By midnight, he had her name, Chantel Freeman. By 12:30, he had her address. By 1 a.m., he had a plan. Drop a heart in the comments if this story is hitting you in the feels. Have you ever had someone see you when you felt invisible? Share your story below. Chantel's bodega run was habitual. Every Saturday night at 11:45 p.m., she'd walk 3 blocks to the 24-hour corner store for orange juice and bagels, provisions for Sunday morning when she allowed herself to sleep past 6 a.m. She'd made this walk hundreds of times, phone in one hand, keys positioned between the knuckles of her other hand like the self-defense instructor had taught her in the free community class 2 years ago. Tonight felt different. The street was too quiet. The usual ambient noise of the Bronx somehow muted. Chantel's instincts, the same ones that had kept her safe for 26 years, whispered warnings she couldn't quite articulate. She walked faster, her sneakers silent against cracked pavement. She never saw them coming. The first man grabbed her from behind, one arm wrapping around her chest, and the other clamping over her mouth before she could scream. Professional. Practiced. His grip suggested training that went beyond street thuggery. Chantel's keys clattered to the sidewalk as she thrashed, trying to remember the self-defense moves that seemed so simple in the community center, but felt impossible now with 200 pounds of muscle crushing her ribs. A white van materialized at the curb, door already sliding open. Chantel managed to bite the hand covering her mouth, tasted leather and regret, heard a grunt of pain. She got out half a scream before something hard connected with her temple and the world tilted sideways. When her vision cleared, she was inside the van, zip ties cutting into her wrists, the door slamming shut on the street where her keys still lay glinting under the streetlight. 3 men surrounded her. The driver accelerated before she could orient herself enough to try the door. Then a face emerged from the shadows in the back of the van, and Chantel's stomach dropped. The family resemblance was unmistakable. Same aggressive jawline as Terrell, same cruel set to the mouth. But this man's eyes held a cold calculation his younger brother lacked. This was someone who'd graduated from throwing punches to ordering them thrown. "You cost my brother his dignity," Stu Coulson said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather rather than kidnapping. "Let's see what yours is worth." Chantel's mind raced through scenarios, each worse than the last. She forced herself to breathe through her nose, to think past the panic clawing at her chest. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No?" Stu pulled out his phone, swiping through photos until he found what he wanted. He turned the screen toward her, Terrell's face swollen and bruised almost beyond recognition, one eye completely shut, jaw obviously broken. "My baby brother. The Korean businessman did this. Because of you." The van turned sharply and Chantel braced herself against the wall. Her temple throbbed where she'd been hit. "I didn't ask him to do anything. I don't even know him." "But he knows you." Stu's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Enough to risk exposure. Enough to send a message that got back to me real quick. So either you're lying or you're more important than you realize. Either way, you're useful." One of the other men pulled out a phone and pressed it to Chantel's ear. The line rang twice before connecting. "Yes?" Ray's voice, calm and controlled, exactly as it had been in the cafe. Stu nodded to the man holding Chantel. He twisted her arm hard enough to make her cry out, the sound raw and involuntary. The silence that followed her scream was worse than any response. Chantel could hear Ray breathing on the other end, could almost feel the temperature drop through the phone connection. "You disrespected blood," Stu said, taking the phone back. "Now I have something you want. And brother, you're going to learn what happens when you put hands on a Coulson. If you hurt her..." Ray's voice had gone deadly quiet. Too late. Stu ended the call with a satisfied click. Chantel's arm throbbed where the man had wrenched it, but she forced herself to stay present, to memorize details. The van's interior smelled like cigarettes and cheap air freshener. They were heading south based on the turns, probably toward the waterfront. 4 men total, including Stu. The driver kept checking his mirror nervously. She was already calculating odds, cataloging potential weapons, preparing herself for whatever came next. Across the city, in an office that didn't officially exist, Ray Young stared at his phone for 3 seconds after the line went dead. 3 seconds where his carefully constructed controls shattered like glass. His hand closed around the phone hard enough that the screen cracked. Min Jun, working late at the conference table, looked up at the sound. He'd served under Ray for 8 years and had seen his boss handle gang wars, federal investigations, and territorial disputes with the Russians. He'd never seen him look like this. "Boss?" Ray's voice when he spoke was so controlled it terrified Min Jun more than shouting would have. "Find her, now. Activate everyone. Every contact, every camera, every informant on the payroll. I want her location in the next 10 minutes, or I want to know why." Min Jun was already pulling up his laptop, fingers flying across keys, but he had to ask. "Boss, Stu Coulson is small time. We can negotiate." "There is no negotiation." Ray stood, his movements precise despite the rage Min Jun could see thrumming through him. He put hands on her. He made her scream. There is no scenario where he walks away from this. The war room filled rapidly as Min Jun sent the emergency signal. Ji-hoon arrived first, still in gym clothes. Yuki came from her surveillance hub in Queens. David appeared from whatever darkness he typically occupied. Within 5 minutes, Ray's entire network was online and focused. "Traffic cameras," Ray ordered. "White van, Bronx, 11:47 p.m. cross-reference with known Coulson properties and associates." Yuki's fingers danced across her keyboard. "Got a van matching description heading south on Webster Avenue. Ran 2 red lights. No plates visible." "Stay on it. Where's it going?" "Waterfront. Red Hook direction." Ray's jaw tightened. Stu's territory. The man was bold enough to bring Chantel to his home ground, confident enough to believe Ray wouldn't dare a direct assault. That confidence would be Stu's last mistake. "Full tactical gear," Ray said quietly. "I want her extracted and home within the hour. Minimal casualties, maximum message. Stu Coulson learns tonight what happens when you touch something under my protection." Min Jun hesitated. "Boss, you've never claimed anyone publicly before. Going after her this hard, everyone will know." "Good." Ray met his second's eyes. "She's not just anyone. She's mine to protect. And anyone who doesn't understand that by morning isn't paying attention." The admission hung in the air. Ray's team exchanged glances, understanding shifting across their faces. This wasn't about principle or respect or organizational reputation. This was personal. "Find her," Ray repeated, and this time his voice carried something his people had never heard before: fear. The warehouse smelled like rust and river water. Chantel's hands were zip-tied to a metal chair bolted to the concrete floor, her shoulders already aching from the awkward angle. Stu circled her like a predator, savoring the moment before the kill, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. 4 other men lounged against crates in the shadows, watching with the casual interest of people who'd seen this show before. Chantel forced herself to catalog everything: the door to her left, the windows high on the walls, the loose pipe near one of the support columns that might serve as a weapon if she could reach it. "Here's what's going to happen," Stu said, stopping in front of her. "Your boyfriend is going to come for you, and when he does, I'm going to teach him the same lesson he taught my brother. Respect. With interest." Chantel kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. "He's not my boyfriend, I told you, I barely know him." "Then why'd he react like that when I made you scream?" Stu crouched down, getting in her face. "Men like Ray Young don't break cover for strangers, so either you're lying or you're too stupid to see what's right in front of you." Chantel met his eyes without flinching. She'd learned years ago that showing fear to men like this was like bleeding in shark-infested water. "Maybe he's just a decent person. You should try it sometime." The backhand came fast, snapping her head sideways. Blood filled her mouth again, the split from Terrell's earlier slap reopening. But Chantel had been hit before. By circumstance, by poverty, by a world that seemed determined to keep her down. She'd learned to absorb the impact and keep standing. She turned back slowly, spat blood onto Stu's expensive sneakers, and smiled. "That all you got?" Stu's face darkened, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He checked it, frowned, and stepped away to take the call. Chantel used the moment to test her restraints. The zip ties were tight but standard issue. If she could dislocate her thumb, she'd done it once before, accidentally, knew exactly how much it would hurt. She might be able to slip free. She started working on it, using tiny movements while keeping her eyes on Stu's back, when she heard something that made her heart skip. Sirens. Distant, but getting closer. Stu heard them too. He ended his call abruptly and gestured to two of his men. "Check the perimeter. If cops are sniffing around, we move her." The two men left through a side door. The sirens grew louder, then faded in a different direction. False alarm, or intentional misdirection. Either way, Chantel's window was narrowing. Across the city, Ray stood in his command center surrounded by screens showing traffic camera feeds, building schematics, and real-time GPS coordinates. The van had been tracked to a warehouse complex in Red Hook. Yuki had pulled building records. The property was registered to a shell company traced back to Stu's operation. "Satellite shows heat signatures," Ji-hoon reported. 7 people inside. One smaller heat signature separate from the others, probably restrained. 7. Stu plus 6 men. Ray's team numbered 8 including himself, but he had surprise and superior training on his side, and motivation that Stu's hired muscle couldn't match. "I'm going in," Ray said, already moving toward the weapons locker. "Boss," Minjun started. "She's there because of me." Ray's voice left no room for argument. "I bring her home." Minjun exchanged glances with the others, then nodded. "Surgical strike. We ghost in, extract the target, ghost out. David takes point on entry. Yuki maintains surveillance overwatch. Ji-hoon coordinates extraction vehicles." "And the Coulsons?" David asked quietly. Ray checked his weapon with practiced efficiency. "Stu made this personal. I'm returning the favor." The drive to Red Hook took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Ray sat in the back of the tactical van, earpiece active, listening to Yuki's updates on heat signatures and movement patterns. Chantel was still alive, still in the same position. But for how long? If she's hurt, Ray thought, then stopped himself. She was already hurt. He'd heard her scream, had spent the last 43 minutes imagining what Stu might be doing to her, and the images threatened to shatter his focus. "Boss, you need to be cold for this," Minjun said quietly from beside him. "If you go in emotional, people die, including her." Ray met his second's eyes. "I am cold. But when this is done, Stu Coulson is going to wish I'd stayed that way." They parked 3 blocks from the target. The team moved through shadows like water, years of training and natural talent combining into lethal efficiency. Ray's earpiece crackled with Yuki's voice. 2 guards outside, rotating pattern every 90 seconds. You have a 30-second window between rotations. David went first, his movements barely disturbing the air. The 2 outside guards dropped without a sound, tranquilizer darts delivering chemical silence. Not dead. Ray didn't waste lives needlessly, but they'd wake up with headaches and hazy memories. The warehouse door was locked. Ji-hoon had it open in 8 seconds. Inside, Chantel was listening to Stu monologue about respect and territory and lessons learned. She'd managed to dislocate her thumb. The pain was stunning, brought tears to her eyes, but she was working the zip ties slowly, millimeter by millimeter. "Your boy's taking his time," Stu was saying. "Maybe he's not as invested as I thought. Maybe you really are just some nobody he felt sorry for." Chantel kept her response behind her teeth. Let him talk. Let him feel confident. She'd learned patience working 3 jobs, had learned that survival sometimes meant waiting for the right moment rather than forcing one. Then she heard it, the faintest scrape of metal against concrete. The guards who'd left hadn't returned. One of the remaining men noticed too, reaching for his weapon. The explosion of action happened so fast Chantel could barely track it. The warehouse door burst open. Men in tactical gear poured through with precision that suggested military training. Stu's people reached for weapons but were already too late. And then Ray was there, moving through the chaos like violence made elegant. His weapon was up but controlled, every movement economical and devastating. He dropped 2 of Stu's men with shots that were clearly non-lethal but incapacitating. A third went down from Minjun's tactical baton. Chantel had been working on her restraints throughout the chaos. As Ray's team secured the perimeter, she gave one final wrench and felt the zip tie give way. Her dislocated thumb screamed in protest, but she was free. She grabbed the loose pipe she'd spotted earlier, her body moving on pure adrenaline and survival instinct. Stu saw his opening as Ray's attention fixed on Chantel. He pulled a gun from his waistband, bringing it up toward Ray's back. Chantel moved without thinking. The pipe connected with Stu's wrist with a crack that echoed through the warehouse. His gun clattered away across the concrete. Ray spun at the sound, weapon trained, then stopped. The sight before him arrested all motion. Chantel stood with the pipe still raised, breathing hard, blood from her reopened lip trickling down her chin. Her left hand hung at an unnatural angle, dislocated thumb. Ray registered clinically, and bruises were already forming on her face. But her eyes blazed with defiance that transcended her injuries. She was magnificent. Stu scrambled backward on the concrete, cradling his broken wrist. Ray's team had secured the remaining men, zip-tying them with their own supplies in what Minjun would later describe as poetic justice. But Ray couldn't look away from Chantel. "Are you hurt?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "I'm fine." She lowered the pipe, but didn't drop it. "I had it under control." Despite everything, the violence, the blood, the tactical operation still securing the perimeter, Ray felt his mouth curve into something that might have been a smile. "I know you did." "Then why?" Chantel's voice cracked slightly. The adrenaline was crashing now, her body beginning to register the full extent of what had happened. "Why did you come?" Before Ray could answer, Stu lunged for the gun he'd dropped. Desperation made him fast, but not fast enough. Ray's boot came down on Stu's reaching hand, pinning it to the concrete with enough force to make bones grind. "You put your hands on her," Ray said quietly, crouching down so Stu could see his face clearly. "You made her scream. You tied her to a chair in your warehouse and thought you could use her to get to me." Stu's face was pale, pain and fear warring for dominance. "Listen, man, we can work this out." "We can't." Ray's voice carried the finality of a closing door. "Because you made this about her, and she doesn't forgive as easily as I do." He looked up at Chantel, who still held the pipe, her eyes locked on Stu with the kind of cold fury that came from a lifetime of being underestimated. "Your call," Ray said simply. Chantel stared at Stu Coulson, this man who'd ripped her off the street, tied her up, hit her, used her as bait. She thought about all the times she'd been invisible, all the times people had looked through her or dismissed her or treated her like furniture. She thought about Terrell's hand cracking across her face in the cafe, about Mrs. Vandermeer asking if she was still here. She thought about who she was and who she refused to become. "Call the police," she said, lowering the pipe. "Let him explain kidnapping charges to a judge." Ray's expression shifted into something that might have been approval or respect or both. "Anonymous tip, he's got enough priors that this will stick." "Boss," Minjun said from the doorway, "we need to move. NYPD response time to Red Hook is 10 minutes. We've been here for 6. Ray stood smoothly, his hand automatically reaching toward Chantel, then hesitating. "Can you walk?" "I've been walking on my own for 26 years. But her voice lacked heat, and when she took a step, her knees buckled slightly. Ray caught her before she fell, his arm around her waist, careful of her injuries. "I know, but you don't have to. Not tonight." Something in Chantel broke then. Not her strength, but the wall she'd built to contain everything she wouldn't let herself feel. The terror of being grabbed off her street. The pain of Stu's backhand. The impossible reality of Ray materializing like something out of a movie to pull her out of darkness. "My thumb," she said faintly. I had to dislocate it to get free. Ray's jaw tightened. He looked at Minjun. Medical kit. Now. I can pop it back, Chantel said. I've done it before. When? Working at the dry cleaners. Got it caught in the pressing machine. She tried to demonstrate, but her hands were shaking too badly. Ray caught her hand gently, studying the angle. This is going to hurt. Story of my life. He smiled at that, soft and sad. Then, with movements both swift and precise, he manipulated her thumb back into place. Chantel bit back a scream, turning it into a hiss between clenched teeth. Tears she'd refused to shed for Stu spilled over now from pure physical pain. I'm sorry, Ray said quietly, already wrapping her thumb with medical tape from Minjun's kit. I'm sorry you were taken. Sorry you were hurt. Sorry you had to fight your way out before I could reach you. Not your fault. Chantel's voice was thick. You didn't tell Stu to grab me. No, but he grabbed you to get to me. Ray finished taping her thumb, his touch lingering a moment longer than necessary. Which makes it my fault anyway. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. David was already herding Stu and his men into a corner, arranging them in a tableau that would tell the right story when police arrived. Ji-hoon was wiping down surfaces, erasing their presence with practiced efficiency. Time to go, Minjun called. Ray guided Chantel toward the exit, his arm still supporting her weight. She leaned into him more than she wanted to admit, exhaustion and shock finally catching up. They emerged into the cool night air where two black sedans waited with engines running. Hospital first, Ray said, helping her into the back seat. No hospitals. Chantel's voice gained strength. No police reports, no documentation. I can't afford medical bills. And I definitely can't afford to explain this to my sister. Ray slid in beside her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. I have a private physician. He'll come to my estate. Ask no questions. Bill me directly. I can't. Please. The single word carried weight that silenced her protest. Let me do this. You can argue with me about everything else after, but let me do this. Chantel studied his face in the passing streetlights as the car pulled away from the warehouse. Ray Young, this man she'd served coffee to for 3 months without really seeing. This man who'd cleared a cafe with 3 words, who'd mobilized an army to find her, who looked at her like she mattered beyond any metric she'd learned to measure her worth by. Who are you? She asked quietly. Ray's hand found hers in the space between them, his grip warm and solid. Someone who should have introduced himself properly 3 months ago. Someone who's been a coward about the things that matter. Someone who's done terrible things but is trying very hard to do this one thing right. That's not an answer. I know. He met her eyes. But it's the truth. And when you're ready, when you've healed and rested and decided whether you can stand to look at me after tonight, I'll tell you everything else. Chantel wanted to argue, to demand answers now, to maintain the independence that had kept her alive and functional through years of hardship. But her body had other plans. The adrenaline crash was complete. Exhaustion pulling at her consciousness like an undertow. Don't leave, she heard herself say, hating how small her voice sounded. I won't. Ray's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I promise. Sleep now. You're safe. And despite everything that had happened, despite all the reasons she shouldn't trust this man whose world had just swallowed her whole, Chantel believed him. She let her eyes close, let herself drift, held safe in the back seat of a car driving through the night toward answers she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Chantel woke in a bed that wasn't hers. Egyptian cotton sheets, a ceiling without water stains, silence broken only by birdsong rather than her neighbor's arguments. She sat up too quickly and her body reminded her of every injury. Bruised ribs, swollen face, bandaged thumb, the general ache of being thrown in a van and tied to a chair. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Not the Bronx. Not her cramped apartment with its broken heater and thin walls. Memory crashed back in fragments. The warehouse, Ray's rescue, the car ride. A doctor with gentle hands who'd examined her injuries, declared nothing permanently damaged, given her something for the pain. She drifted in and out as Ray carried her upstairs, his voice low and reassuring against her hair. The door opened. Ray entered carrying a tray with tea, toast, and what looked like homemade soup. He'd changed from tactical gear into simple jeans and a t-shirt that made him look younger, more approachable, less like the man who'd orchestrated a military precision rescue. "You're awake." He set the tray on the bedside table. "Dr. Kim said you'd sleep for at least 12 hours. You managed 8. Chantel touched her face, feeling the swelling. "What time is it?" 2 in the afternoon, Sunday. Ray sat in the chair near the bed, maintaining respectful distance. "Your phone has been buzzing. Your roommate Keisha called 6 times. I didn't answer, but I had Minjun send a text from your phone saying you were staying with a friend and you'd call tomorrow." "You had—" Chantel stopped, processing. "How do you know my roommate's name?" Ray's expression shifted into something that might have been regret. "Because I've been watching you for 3 months, learning your patterns, your routines, your life, making sure you were safe." The words hung between them like smoke. Chantel pushed herself up straighter despite her protesting ribs, needing the psychological advantage of sitting upright. "You've been stalking me." "Yes." No deflection, no excuses. "I've been protecting you without your knowledge or consent, having you followed home, monitoring your commute, paying attention to who interacted with you and how. It started as simple observation and became more. More." Chantel's voice went cold. "More like what exactly? Some rich guy deciding the poor maid needed a guardian angel she didn't ask for?" Ray flinched like she'd slapped him. Good. She wanted him to feel a fraction of the violation currently crawling under her skin. "My sister's name was Jian," he said quietly. "She was 23 when she died, caught in crossfire from a gang dispute she had nothing to do with. She was studying to be a social worker, wanted to help people, believed the world could be better if enough people tried to make it so." His voice roughened. "She was kind in a world that punished kindness, and I watched her bleed out on the street while sirens wailed and nobody came fast enough." Chantel's anger wavered but didn't break. "So I remind you of your dead sister? That's supposed to make this better?" "No. You remind me of who she might have become if she'd lived." Ray met her eyes. "Strong despite everything trying to break you. Kind despite every reason to be hard. Fighting for other people even when you're barely surviving yourself. I saw you defend that elderly woman 3 months ago, saw you refuse her tip because you understood what it cost her to offer it, and I saw Jian in your smile. That's not a reason to invade my privacy." "You're right. It's not." Ray stood, pacing to the window. "I'm not offering excuses, Chantel. I'm trying to explain how someone who spent 15 years being careful and calculated made the stupidest decision of his life. I started watching you to honor my sister's memory. I kept watching because you became more than a memory. You became the only real thing in a life built on lies and violence and control." Chantel absorbed this, her mind racing. "What are you? Really? Minjun calls you boss. You emptied that cafe like you owned it. You run tactical operations and have private physicians who make house calls. The tattoos on your arms aren't decorative." Ray turned to face her. "I run an organization that operates outside legal boundaries. Import-export is real, but it funds other enterprises. Gambling, information brokering, occasionally violence when other methods fail. When I've hurt people who deserved it and people who probably didn't. I've made choices that keep me awake at night. I'm not a good man, Chantel, but I'm trying to be a better one." The honesty was brutal and somehow comforting. Chantel had been lied to her whole life, by landlords promising repairs, by employers promising advancement, by a system claiming equal opportunity while stacking decks. At least Ray wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't. "Why me?" she asked. "Really? And don't give me more analogies about your sister." Why do you care about one broke waitress in a city full of people who need saving? Ray crossed back to the chair, sitting down like the distance between them caused physical pain. Because you're not broke. Money doesn't measure worth, though I know this world makes you believe otherwise. You're brilliant. I've seen the course catalogs you study on the subway. You're kind. I've watched you split your own dinner to give half to the homeless veteran who camps near the cafe. You're funny. I've heard you make Rosa laugh so hard she had to sit down. You're everything I stopped believing existed in my world. And the first time I saw you smile, really smile, at that elderly woman you helped, I thought, that's what Gion's smile looked like. But every time after that I thought, that's what Chantel's smile looks like. And I wanted to protect it. Protect you. Even if it meant watching from the shadows forever. Tears threatened, but Chantel blinked them back. I can't be someone's project. Can't be the charity case you feel good about helping. I've worked too hard. Sacrificed too much. Trying to be seen as anything less than equal. Then see me as I am. Ray leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Not as a savior or a guardian angel or a rich man throwing money at problems. See me as someone who's terrified of what he's feeling. Someone who's built his entire life on control and predictability. And then you walked into his cafe and dismantled everything with your grace and your strength and your refusal to bow. I'm not offering pity, Chantel. I'm offering partnership. I'm offering to help you get what you want. That degree, that education, that future. Not because you need me, but because you deserve support. And maybe, if you can stand to look at my world without flinching, maybe you could let me stand beside you in yours. Chantel's throat tightened. I can't pay you back. Not for years. Maybe not ever. I don't want payment. Ray's voice was firm. But, if it matters to you, we'll call it a loan. Write up a contract. Set whatever terms make you feel equal in this. Charge me interest if it helps your pride. I don't care about money, Chantel. I care about you finishing what you started. I care about you not working yourself to death across 3 jobs. I care about you having time to study and sleep and exist as something more than survival mode. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't. Ray's smile was sad. I've proven I'll watch you without permission, manipulate situations to protect you, use my organization's resources to keep you safe. I've proven I'm possessive and probably unbalanced when it comes to your welfare, but I've also proven I'll come for you when you're in danger. And I'll mobilize everything I have to bring you home. I'll respect your choices even when they terrify me. And I'll tell you the truth, even when lies would be easier. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and danger and something that felt dangerously close to hope. One condition, Chantel said finally, full transparency. No more watching from shadows. No more making decisions about my safety without asking me first. We're partners or we're nothing. Relief flooded Ray's face. Partners. And we start small. Coffee. Actual conversation, not you pretending to read your newspaper while studying me. You tell me about your world, I tell you about mine, and we figure out if there's any way they fit together. Coffee, Ray agreed. Though I should warn you, I've already memorized how you take yours. Light cream, no sugar, not in the blue mug if Rosa has it clean. Despite everything, Chantel felt her mouth curve. Stalker. Reformed stalker, Ray corrected. With excellent attention to detail and questionable boundaries that I'm working on. This is insane, Chantel said, but she was smiling now. 3 days ago, you were just the quiet businessman who tipped too much. Now you're a crime boss who rescued me from a warehouse and wants to pay for my college education. Life comes at you fast. Ray's expression turned serious again. I know this is overwhelming. I know you need time to process. But I need you to understand something, Chantel. Last night, when I heard you scream on that phone call, I would have burned the entire city down to find you. That's not rational. That's not controlled. That's what you do to me. And it terrifies me in ways 15 years of organized crime never has. Chantel reached out, her bandaged hand finding his across the space between them. It terrifies me too, But maybe that means it's real. Ray's fingers closed around hers carefully, mindful of her injuries. Will you let me take you home? Or will you stay here until you're healed? No pressure, no expectations. Guest room, locked door. Min-jun stationed outside if it makes you feel safer. Home, Chantel decided. My home. But you can drive me. And maybe tomorrow we can have that coffee. Tomorrow? Ray agreed. And every day after. If you'll let me. He helped her stand, guided her downstairs where her clothes from last night had been cleaned and pressed. Min-jun waited by the car with respectful distance and knowing eyes. In the drive back to the Bronx felt like traveling between worlds. Manhattan's gleaming towers gave way to graffitied brick and chain-link fences. Ray didn't comment on the contrast, didn't seem to see Chantel's neighborhood as anything less than what his own world offered. At her building, he walked her to the door. Keisha's face appeared in the window, eyes going wide at the sight of Ray's expensive car parked on their broken street. Tomorrow, Chantel said before doubt could creep in. Cafe Meridian, 7 p.m. I'll be there. Ray's hand lifted like he wanted to touch her face, then fell. Call if you need anything. Min-jun's number is in your phone now. Mine too. And Chantel? Yeah? Thank you for trusting me. I know I don't deserve it, but I'll spend however long it takes proving I can. He left before she could respond, climbing back into his car and disappearing into the city's chaos. Chantel stood on her stoop watching until the taillights vanished, her bandaged thumb throbbing, her face bruised, her entire world tilted on an axis she hadn't known existed. Inside, Keisha had approximately 1 million questions, but Chantel just smiled, touched her lips where Ray's eyes had lingered, and thought about tomorrow. If you're feeling this story, drop a like and let me know in the comments. Are you Team Ray? Or do you think Chantel should run far away from his world? 6 months changed everything and nothing at all. Chantel walked across NYU's campus with textbooks balanced against her hip, her backpack heavy with the weight of possibility. Business administration, second semester back. Her professors didn't know she'd dropped out 3 years ago, or didn't know about the cleaning jobs or the warehouse or the Korean crime boss who'd paid her tuition in full while she set up a payment plan she'd designed herself at 12% interest. Ray had argued about the interest. She'd won. That's how she knew it might actually work between them. She still worked at Cafe Meridian 3 evenings a week. Not because she needed the money anymore, though she'd kept crystal clean too. Refused to give up everything she'd built just because her life had shifted, but because the cafe mattered. It was where she'd found her voice, where she'd stood up for Kellyanne, where everything had changed. Rosa had cried when Chantel came back after the incident, as they'd all agreed to call it. No police report, no news coverage, just a week off, and some careful bruise cover-up. In the official story was a mugging gone wrong. Only Rosa seemed to suspect there was more to it, but she never pushed. Every Saturday at 6:30, Ray Young walked through the cafe door. He ordered the same black coffee, but now he sat at the counter instead of the corner booth. And when Chantel's shift ended at 7, they left together. Coffee had turned into dinner. Dinner had turned into long conversations in his car parked outside her building, neither wanting the night to end. Conversations had turned into her hand in his at the movies, his arm around her shoulders at a museum she'd mentioned wanting to visit. They learned each other slowly, carefully. She told him about her mother's death, about the medical bills that still haunted her credit report, about Naomi's scholarship to Spelman and the pride that never quite outweighed the grief of not being there herself. He told her about Jian, about the empire built on rage and pain, about the codes he followed in a world without rules because someone had to draw lines somewhere. I'm never going to be normal, he'd said one night, parked outside her building at midnight. My world doesn't allow for normal. There will always be threats, always be enemies, always be violence hovering at the edges. Good thing I'm not looking for normal, Chantel had replied, threading her fingers through his. Normal is overrated. I'm looking for real. Their first kiss happened 3 weeks after the warehouse. Chantel had aced her economics midterm, called Ray with the news before she'd even left the classroom. And he'd picked her up in the middle of the day, driven her to Central Park, spread a blanket under a tree. "I'm proud of you," he'd said, watching her with that intensity that still made her breath catch. "You didn't even ask what grade I got. Doesn't matter. You showed up. You tried. You succeeded. That's everything." She'd kissed him then, tired of waiting, tired of the careful distance they'd been maintaining. His surprise had lasted approximately 2 seconds before he'd pulled her closer, his hands gentle in her hair, the kiss deep and sweet and full of promises neither had spoken yet. Now, walking into the cafe for her Saturday shift, Chantel smiled at the memory. 6 months of kisses, of learning his preferences. He hated mushrooms, loved terrible action movies, sang in the shower in Korean. 6 months of him learning her she stressed organized her closet, couldn't sleep without white noise, made the best peach cobbler he'd ever tasted using her grandmother's recipe. 6 months of building something real in the spaces between their different worlds. Rosa looked up from the register, her expression shifting into something Chantel couldn't quite read. "Your man's here already. Been here since we opened. And honey, he's not alone." Chantel's stomach dropped. She pushed through to the main floor and froze. Ray sat at a table in the center of the cafe, not his usual corner, not the counter, but right in the middle where everyone could see. Min-jun stood nearby, along with Ji-hoon and Yuki. But it was the other occupants that made Chantel's heart race. Her sister Naomi sat across from Ray, dressed in her Spellman hoodie, her face lit with excitement. Keisha was there too, looking simultaneously thrilled and terrified. Even Mrs. Glenn, the elderly Korean regular, had been pulled into the group. Ray stood when he saw Chantel, his expression nervous in a way she'd never witnessed. This man who'd faced down gang leaders and orchestrated warehouse raids looked genuinely scared. "What's going on?" Chantel asked, approaching slowly. "I have a question to ask you," Ray said. "But first, I needed to make sure the people who matter most to you knew my intentions were honorable, so I asked Naomi to fly in from Atlanta. I asked Keisha and Mrs. Glenn to be here. I wanted them to know, to understand, what I'm about to do." "Ray?" Chantel's voice trembled. He dropped to one knee. The cafe went silent. Every customer, every employee, everyone stopped to watch. And this was the same floor where Tyrell had struck her, the same space where she'd been humiliated and hurt and reduced. And now Ray was kneeling here, in front of everyone, making her visible in a completely different way. "Chantel Freeman," Ray said, pulling out a ring that caught the light like captured stars. "For 3 months I watched you from the shadows, too afraid to speak. For 6 months I've gotten to know you in the light, and every day I fall deeper. You're brilliant and kind and strong in ways I'll never fully comprehend. You challenge me to be better. You remind me why honor matters, why codes exist, why some things are worth fighting for even when the odds are impossible." Tears tracked down Chantel's face. Naomi was crying too, Keisha filming on her phone with shaking hands. "I can't promise you safety," Ray continued. "My world doesn't work that way. I can't promise you simplicity, because our lives will never be simple. But I can promise you partnership. I can promise you respect. I can promise you that every day for the rest of my life, I will work to deserve the trust you've given me. I can promise that you'll finish your degree, build your career, become everything you're meant to be, and I'll stand beside you celebrating every victory. I can promise that your sister will never want for anything, that your dreams won't be deferred again, that you'll never be invisible to me or anyone in my world." He held up the ring, his hand steady despite the emotion in his voice. "Marry me. Build a life with me. Let me spend every day proving that love isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up, paying attention, and choosing each other even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Chantel looked around the cafe, at Naomi's tear-streaked face, at Keisha's proud grin, at Mrs. Glenn nodding encouragement, at Rosa behind the counter with her hand over her heart, at the customers who'd stopped their conversations to witness this moment, at the place where she'd been struck and humiliated and then rescued. This was her life. Messy and complicated and beautiful and real. She looked back at Ray, this man who'd entered her world like chaos and possibility combined, who'd seen her when she was invisible to everyone else, who'd respected her enough to let her set the terms even when it terrified him. Yes, she said, her voice carrying across the silent cafe. Yes to partnership. Yes to building something real. Yes to you, exactly as you are. Shadows and all. Ray stood, sliding the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. Then he kissed her, deep and certain, while the cafe erupted in applause and cheers. The wedding happened 3 months later, a blend of traditions that honored both their worlds. Chantel wore white, but the ceremony incorporated Korean pie-bake traditions alongside African-American customs. Ray's organization filled half the church, looking uncomfortable in formal wear. Chantel's community filled the other half, looking equally uncomfortable surrounded by obvious wealth and power. But when Chantel walked down the aisle to Ray's waiting smile, when they exchanged vows in English and Korean, when they fed each other rice cakes and jumped the broom, the two worlds merged into something neither had seen before. Something beautiful. Our Naomi was maid of honor, crying through her entire speech about the sister who'd sacrificed everything so she could thrive. Min-jun was best man, his toast carefully omitting any details about exactly what Ray's import-export business entailed. Mrs. Glenn blessed them in Korean while Keisha blessed them in a prayer their grandmother had taught them. The reception was chaos. Korean barbecue next to soul food, K-pop mixing with Motown on the dance floor, Ray's lieutenants teaching Chantel's cousins how to properly pour soju while learning the electric slide in return. Ray pulled Chantel onto the dance floor for their first dance, holding her close while the DJ played a song that somehow captured everything they were building together. "No regrets?" he murmured against her hair. "A million regrets," Chantel replied, smiling up at him. "But none about you." 1 year later, Chantel sat in her cap and gown at NYU's graduation ceremony, her business administration degree finally complete. Ray sat in the audience beside Naomi and Min-jun, his face showing more pride than she'd ever seen. When they called her name, when she walked across that stage and accepted the diploma she'd thought lost forever, Ray stood and cheered loud enough to embarrass her. She didn't care. Let him cheer. Let the world see. She was done being invisible. After the ceremony, they went home, to the brownstone they'd bought together in Brooklyn, a neighborhood that straddled both their worlds. Ray had insisted she choose it, had respected every decision about renovations and furniture and which rooms were hers alone. That evening, Chantel sat at the Kit Glen table surrounded by law school applications while Ray cooked Korean stew, still learning the southern recipes she'd promised to teach him. Music played from speakers, some playlists they'd built together over months of discovering each other's tastes. Chantel looked up from her applications, watching Ray move around their Kit Glen with the same careful precision he brought to everything. He'd changed since they'd met. Softer around the edges, quicker to smile, more willing to trust that love didn't make him weak. "You know you don't have to do all this," she said, gesturing at the elaborate dinner he was preparing. Ray turned, wooden spoon in hand, his expression warm with affection that still made her heart skip. "I know. But let me anyway." Chantel smiled, the same phrase he'd used in the cafe after clearing the room, after protecting her, after starting everything that led to this moment. She stood, crossed to him, wrapped her arms around his waist from behind. "Okay," she whispered against his shoulder blade. "Let you." They stood there in their Kit Glen, in their home, in the life they'd built from an impossible beginning. Outside, the city hummed with millions of stories, millions of invisible people fighting to be seen. But here, in this space they'd carved out together, Chantel Freeman, now Chantel Young, was the most visible thing in Ray's world.